Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. Got another Master Duel video for you all. So today we're coming back to Tri-Brigade Spright, and it is actually the first day of the new season, although we have already, of course, had a couple of Season 19 deck profiles that were made post-ban list. This is the first video I'm recording that is actually post-ban list. As you can see, Spright Jet is now at 2 copies. Definitely does not affect this deck, honestly, at all, though, because I think I was even running 2 beforehand. If not, definitely most builds were. And, you know, Tri-Brigade Spright, of course, because we're mashing up Spright with another more or less full archetype package here, we would have had to trim back on the Sprights somewhat anyway. So, 2 Spright Jet, not a big deal at all for this deck. I wanted to start off the season with Tri-Brigade Spright because I remember that last time I played this deck, I found myself, especially with Sprint now being a factor, still trying to figure out a lot of the combo lines. I definitely feel a lot more comfortable playing with this deck after this most recent play session. It's like, for me, you know, I can study combo guides, I can follow them letter by letter, but I prefer to just, you know, have it kind of in my head, and it just takes a certain playtest session. Sometimes I'll playtest the deck once or twice, and I'm still kind of like trying to figure it out, but, you know, then I'll have one that clicks, and I finally had that with Tri-Spright here. So yeah, a lot of the combo lines you can pull off with this deck are really cool. Of course, you can do Spright stuff and or Tri-Brigade stuff, ideally doing both. Most often we're using Gigantic to pull Kitt out of the deck to bridge from Sprights to Tri-Brigades. You can't really bridge the other way though, not only because of searchability, but one thing you really have to note when playing this deck is the condition on Tri-Brigade monsters that if you activate one of their effects to banish from the graveyard to summon a Link monster, you can only use Beast, Beast Warrior, and Wing Beast monsters as Link material for the rest of the turn. So if you want to combo it all with your Sprights and use them as materials, you got to make sure that you're always doing that before you are using any of your Tri-Brigade effects. And the other thing that you have to keep in mind as well is getting 2 locked. So on turn 1, getting 2 locked, and that's getting locked into only being able to summon level, rank, or link 2 by something like Gigantic Spright or Spright Starter. Getting 2 locked on turn 1 doesn't really matter. We're only really going to summon level, rank, and link 2 monsters anyway. But beyond that, you do have to be mindful that if you're going to use something like Gigantic Spright or Spright Starter, then you won't be able to, for example, say summon Shurig off of a Revolt or something like that. Or you won't be able to go into Accesscode if you want to do that for lethal. So that is important to keep in mind, those conditions there. Again, not only the Tri-Brigade condition of only being able to use Tri-type monsters once you banish out of the graveyard, but also Gigantic and Starter 2 locking you. So that is honestly why some of the combo lines kind of trip me up, is like, I'd go into a play, and then I'd realize later, like, oh no, I can't use these Spright monsters as materials now, or, you know, whatever, vice versa. But once you kind of get that down, it becomes a lot easier. So this build is relatively standard. There are a couple of things I'm doing a little bit differently. I guess really one main thing in particular. I noticed that pretty much the vast majority of builds on Master Duel meta, I think like 70-some%, we're running 1 Nimble Angler. I definitely very much prefer 2. Because it makes your sprint a lot better if you open with the Nimble Beaver. So if you're only playing the 3 Nimble Beaver and 1 Angler, right? If you normal summon Nimble Beaver, you want to go into Sprint to send the Angler, well, you have to grab another Beaver, and then, you know, the Sprint sending the Angler only gets your 1 remaining Beaver left in deck. But if you have 2 Nimble Angler in your deck, what you can do is normal summon Beaver, special Angler, link them for Sprint effect to send the Angler, and then you summon the remaining 2 Beavers. So I do think it is worth an extra deck slot to put in that second Nimble Angler, because having access to those extra Nimble Beavers not only gives you obviously more materials to work with for your combo, but also more Tri-types engraved, well, also for your combo, but for your Tri-Brigade monsters. Let's see, what else is there? Oh, it seems that a majority of builds were not playing triple tack talent at all. I definitely think this is a great deck to play this card. It's got the space for it very easily, and not only that, but this is one of those decks where it's really not that hard to find lethal off of just like a couple of cards, or just by, you know, taking control of a monster. So I really use triple tack here, not so much as like a turn 1 disruptor as I tend to do with other decks, but this is definitely more of like a to help me push for lethal on turn 2. Of course, it's also still good on turn 1, but yeah, the triple attacks, again, it doesn't seem like the majority of people are playing it in this deck, but I think this is the perfect deck to play triple attack in. I did think about playing 3, but ultimately decided to play a second Tenki instead, but I think moving forward, I will actually cut one of the Tenkis and go back down to 1. Because I actually noted while I was playing that, like, and this is going to sound really weird for a Tri-Brigade deck, but having Fraktall in your hand actually isn't that important for this deck. That sounds really, really weird, I know, especially for Tri-Brigades, but again, it's really, you know, with the ability to either pull the kit out of the deck and onto the field with a Gigantic, or even send it with a Sprint occasionally, you know, you already have such easy access to it that it just doesn't feel like, and also setting up, you know, Tri-types in the graveyard is so easy with the Beavers. The Fraktall, I mean, of course we still play Fraktall, of course we still do, but it definitely feels a lot less necessary for your Tri-Brigade plays than it did in the past, which is something I actually really like about this variant of Tri-Brigade. Of course, we all know, or this is pretty presumptuous, a lot of people probably know that Tri-Brigade was my favorite deck when I first got back into Master Duel, and it's got a special place in my heart. Spright's my current favorite archetype, so to be able to blend them like this, I mean, I couldn't ask for a better deck. So I'm going to go ahead and list out the deck card by card so we all know what's going on with it, and then we're going to take a look at some gameplay. So we are on 2 Tri-Brigade Nervall, 3 Maxx, 2 Nimble Angler, 3 Nimble Beaver, 2 Tri-Brigade Kerass, 3 Tri-Brigade Kitt, 2 Spright Blue, 2 Spright Jet, 1 Spright Red, 1 Spright Carrot, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 2 Tri-Brigade Fraktall, 1 Foolish Burial, 2 Triple Tactics Talent, 2 Fire Formation Tenki, 2 Call by the Grave, 1 Crossout Designator, 2 Spright Starter, 1 Spright Smashers, 2 Infinite Impermanence, and then a Tri-Brigade Revolt. There's our 40 card main deck. Now for the extra deck, we are on 2 Gigantic Spright, 1 Downerd Magician, 1 Divine Arsenal, AA-ZEUS Sky Thunder, 1 Salamangreat Almiraj, 1 IP Masquerena, 1 Ancient Warriors Oath Double Dragon Lords, 1 Tri-Brigade Ferrijit the Barren Blossom, 1 Tri-Brigade Bearbrumm the Rampant Rampager, 1 Spright Elf, 1 Spright Sprint, 1 Tri-Brigade Rugal the Silver Sheller, 1 Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess, 1 Accesscode Talker, and then finally 1 Tri-Brigade Shurg the Ominous Omen. So there's our list. Now let's look at some gameplay. Alright, so we are up against Branded Despia, well, Bestial Branded Despia, you all know the deck. We're up against that going for our first duel here, and we are going to be going first here as well. Opponent's playing an Idolock, something I haven't really run into a lot this season, but they are not really going to get a chance to pull it off here. So here, we're going to start with the Nimble Beaver, but this is a little awkward because I already opened the Nimble Angler. I don't actually go for Sprint here because, well, I don't have an Angler to send in my deck. So still going to pull an Angler from my deck just in case this Angler ends up being live. We can shuffle it back with potentially with either Ferrijit or Bearbrumm. So I'm just going to go for the Gigantic and start my Spright line. Because I already have Kitt plus Kerass in hand, like I definitely can set up my Tri-Brigades very easily here. So like I said, just starting with setting up my Spright monsters here. Gonna special the Kerass by sending the Kitt. Kitt's gonna send Nervall. Nervall's gonna add the Fraktall, but I don't really have too many plans for it here. Gonna activate Starter to get the red, and then link them off to go for IP Masquerena. So at this point, like I mentioned during the deck profile, you want to make sure that on your first turn, you're planning appropriately when it comes to not making sure that your two engines aren't conflicting with one another. That's exactly what I've done here. So the reason I went for Starter and then IP right there is so that I could use my Spright monsters as materials, because as you can see, my next action is going to be to activate Kerass' effect. And again, you have to keep in mind with Kerass, because I think I've been asked this in the comments too. Tri-Brigade is one of those decks where, especially this variant, where I'll often get asked like, wait, I'm trying to do the combo and it doesn't work. Why? You need to make sure you're very carefully reading these conditions. Again, when I use Kerass' effect, I can only use Beast, Beast Warrior, and Wing Beast Link monsters, or I can only use those types of monsters as Link materials, rather, for the remainder of the turn. So that's why we went out of our way to make IP Masquerena when we did. Gonna link summon the Ferrijit. I technically probably should have gotten Bearbrumm first, but it doesn't honestly really matter at the end of the day what order I summon these two in. I get to use Elf to bring back the Kitt. Kitt's effect is going to summon the Ancient Warriors Oath. Now, one thing also too is that zone placement actually really matters here, because both the Bearbrumm and the Ferrijit, which I banished, have left pointing link arrows. So for this particular combo line, you have to summon Spright Elf to the right extra monster zone to be able to put out the Ancient Warriors Oath, because if you summon Elf over here, you know, you won't be able to, I mean, technically you could still put the, the Ferrijit or the Bearbrumm right here, and potentially some of the Ancient Warrior's Oath over here, but it's really easy to get your zones mixed up, so you do have to be particularly noteworthy of the zone placement. So I'm going for Sprint here, but the only reason I went for Sprint in this case is to send the Bearbrumm so that way I could activate her effect. The Sprint is just going to dump an extra kit here. I don't want to dump the Angler, even though I did put it back in the deck, because I won't be able to summon the Beavers because of the Bearbrumm effect. That's yet another condition you have to keep in mind, is that once you search the Revolt with Bearbrumm, you can only special summon Tri-Brigade monsters for the remainder of the turn. So definitely make sure that you're keeping that in mind too. And again, that's why we did not send the Angler, because we wouldn't be able to summon our Beavers. Opponent's going to draw phase Super Poly. That is definitely pretty brutal, but ultimately it's actually not that big of a deal, because yeah, we do lose 2 of our monsters here, but it's gonna pretty much always be Garura, right? Because they can't summon Mud Dragon or Dragosepelio with this board, or Starving Venom is the one I actually meant, because I only have 1 Dark, and the only fires I have are matching types. So I don't really care if they summon Garura here, that's fine. And I also don't really care about losing my monsters, because Sprint and Elf were definitely the least 2 important monsters on this board. IP and Ancient Warrior's Oath Double Dragon Lords both offer much more disruption, and now I have room to activate my Revolt a lot more freely without having to clear up space beforehand. So opponent's going to start off with Lubellion, using that to add a Saronir from hand. Not particularly concerned about that. This Branded Fusion is a little bit more concerning. Definitely going to fire off my Maxx now. Of course, we couldn't chain it to the Super Poly because you can't chain to Super Poly, but alright, looks like they are summoning the Albion here using Cartesia and Albaz. I'm going to get to draw a card from that, of course. The Albion effect is going to activate. I'm going to chain the Imperm here, so that way they can't continue their fusion line. I definitely do not want a Mirror Jade to be dropping on this board. That would be very stressful to deal with. So opponent's going to sack off the Albion in order to grab a Bestial Lubellion. I'm going to chain Revolt and then also double Dragon Lord's effect at this time. That's going to do a couple of things. As you can see, that's going to allow me to send the Revolt off the double Dragon Lord, so I don't have to commit to sending like an IP or something. I can bounce the Garura. That's kind of more of a bonus. I'm not super concerned about this Garura being on the field, but bouncing it does mean my opponent won't get an extra draw card. This also means that since I, of course, chained the Revolt, or activated the Revolt as Chain Link 1, it'll still resolve even if it's not on the field, and then I can summon the Shurug and use that to banish the Lubellion. This is also, by the way, I flipped my toggle to on when my opponent was summoning the Lubellion, so that way I could do this on the resolution of Lubellion's effect, and now my opponent doesn't have an opportunity to grab a branded continuous spell or a trap card from their deck. I definitely do not want Branded Regain to be hitting the field here. So bringing back Bearbrumm, Kerass, and Nervall. Honestly, yet another thing you have to keep in mind is that you have to actually summon one of your Link 2 monsters, one of your Link 2 Tri-Brigade monsters, like, appropriately. And by that I mean like not using a Tri-Brigade effect, but by actually Link summoning, because a Tri-Brigade or a Link monster summon off of a Tri-Brigade effect will not be able to come back off of Revolt. But in order to summon Shurug with only 3 monster zones, you need to use a Link 2 and then 2 non-Link monsters. So again, that's honestly yet another thing you have to make sure that you're doing during your turn 1 combo. But at this rate, my opponent's just going to concede. Even if they didn't concede there, how that would have played out is I would have banished the Lubellion, and then keeping my toggle on upon the resolution of that effect, you can then use IP Masquerena's effect with the Ancient Warrior's Oath Double Dragon Lords. Use that to make an Appaloosa for 2 extra monster effect negates. So we would have had 2 monster negates. My opponent's still under Maxx. They have 3 cards left in hand. One of them is Saronir, and as you can see, the rest weren't enough to get the win or even continue to play. So that is a very much like, that's honestly not even an ideal turn 1 combo with this deck, because we opened the extra Nimble Angler, so it was a little bit awkward, but that's an idea of like what this deck is capable of putting out, which is a lot. So let's go and take a look at the next duel here. Got another game against Bistrio Branded Despia. This deck is all over ladder lately, which is kind of interesting. It's definitely expected to run into more tier limits and sprites like right at the beginning of the season, but no, it's a lot of branded Bestial Despia. It seems people are determined to play it despite the branded fusion semi-limit. Of course, that doesn't really impact the deck that much, so. Alright, I've got the turn 1 Maxx, my opponent's got a call by, so we are actually going to be playing a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Although if I have my way, this Ash Blossom will ensure via negation of a branded fusion that my opponent will not be doing much playing at all. So sure enough, they're going to normal summon the Almiraj and add aforementioned branded fusion. And once it's activating, I'm just going to, yep, there goes the Ash Blossom. Interesting to see branded fusion usage rate still at 2.85%. I wonder if that's lower, actually. I wonder how often that's actually updating in real time. Opponent's going to set a card and then pass. As always, against this deck, you have to be wary of Super Poly, but that said, you know, you can only really play around Super Poly so much, right? Like, it is a scary card, but I found in my personal experience that it's usually not enough to completely stop my plays. Sometimes it is, but more often than not, I wouldn't go out of your way to, like, you know, try to avoid playing into it, because then I think you just end up with much worse board states, given that they don't have the Super Poly. Plus, I mean, it's also one of those cases where at the end of the day, you know, with certain pieces of disruption, they either have it or they don't, right? In this case, they do. They do have the Super Poly. Discarding the Branded Beast and fusing their Almiraj with my Gigantic Spright to make a Despian Kerass. Thankfully, no Mirajade, because that was Almiraj and not Albaz. But this Kerass is still going to be a little annoying to deal with, but I think I can still manage. I'm going to go ahead and link off for the Spright Elf here. Elf is going to bring back the Carrot. Then I'm going to overlay the Carrot and the Elf to go for another Gigantic, because I didn't actually activate Gigantic's effect. My opponent changed Super Poly on the resolution of the summon. So Gigantic's going to pull a Kitt from my deck. Kitt will now banish those two Nimble Beavers for Ancient Warriors, Oath Double Dragon Lords. I'm going to use that to send Kitt and bounce the Kerass. Kerass will change its effect, but I'm just going to go ahead and use red to negate it. I definitely do not want to destroy the Kerass here. I want it to go back to the opponent's extra deck. So Kitt's going to activate, sending a Nervall. Nervall F is going to activate, adding a Kerass. Also, I'm not sure... Oh, and then we're going to use triple attack to get 2 more draws here. So, not going to be able to finish our opponent off here, but as you can see, with our hand state, our hand and board state, just how much advantage we have over our opponent, there's really no hope for them coming back. Also, I wanted to note that I was a little surprised my opponent didn't activate the Kerass effect, because isn't this... Yeah, when it leaves the field. So I don't know what happened there. Maybe it missed the time. I don't think it misses timing, though, does it? It might, actually. I don't know. But, yeah, even if my opponent had some in the Albaz there, I did actually have a plan for that. I was going to Smashers to banish one of the Spright monsters out of my graveyard, banish the red, banish the Albaz when it activates its effect, so then my opponent doesn't get to Mirajade me for free. So, even though my opponent didn't resolve the Kerass, I did actually have a plan in mind for it. But now here I have 3 backer on top of, you know, the red negate going into my opponent's 2 cards on their turn. And yeah, it's pretty easy to see that they're just going to go ahead and give us the win here. So we have a couple more duels to watch. Here is the next one. Alright, for this game, we're going to be up against good old Stun. So we're going to have to play through some amount of floodgates here. Let's see how bad it ends up being. We do end up going second, so definitely not a place you want to be against Stun, especially because... you know, even if we had opened something like Maxx, that wouldn't have been too great. Ash Blossom is actually not too bad for stuff like Gravekeeper's Commandant or like Pot of Extravagance or Desires or Prosperity, but yeah, unfortunately did not open that here. Opponent's going to activate a Necro Valley, set a monster, and then a couple of cards before passing back over to me. So I'm going to start by activating Tenki and grabbing a Fraktall. I do have a couple of options here. Like, the Necro Valley is going to keep me from banishing monsters for my Tri-Brigade effects, but you know, I could still normal summon Kitt, special red, and then, you know, link for an Elf, then Elf bring one of those 2 monsters back, overlay for... Actually, no, I couldn't have done that because of Necro Valley, so I would have had to have overlaid for Gigantic summon blue, blue for Jet, Jet for a starter, maybe? The problem there, though, is that, like, my opponent's got a couple of back rows, and the face tail monster as well. This could very easily be a Fossil Dyna, so what I'm going to do actually after activating the Tenki is just summon Fraktall in battle. Opponent's going to add an Arm Recall. There's also the case of, like, even if they don't have some floodgates here, it could very easily be a Mirror Force. Now, as you can see here, it was just an Arm Recall and a Maxx, so it was, like, literally the, like, most minimum my opponent could have, but... it would have been very easy for my opponent to have messed me up there. Opponent's going to draw a card, then pass back over to me, drawing a Crossout Designator for my turn. So now that I know my opponent's back row isn't really likely to be anything live, and they just, you know, drew it in past, I know one of their cards in hand is an equip spell they can't make use of. I'm just going to go for it here. I'm like, you know, I might not be able to move stuff out of the graveyard, but I can definitely do a lot with the graveyard still, namely using Kitt as a material to summon Sprint, using both effects to send both Angler and Nervall. That will allow me to add a Kerass for potential summoning later. And then 2 Nimble Beavers out of my deck. And then, yeah, my opponent's just going to concede because at that point my plan was to overlay the Spright and one of the Beavers to go for a Gigantic plus Blue, Blue for Jet. And then, yeah, at that point, like that right there, I think is enough damage just to end the duel. But we definitely have a lot more combo potential after that if Jet grabs Starter, and then we make other AA-ZEUS or Leak monsters, so on and so forth. So, yeah, pretty nice game against Stun. That's definitely how ideally we like our games against Stun to go there. Even though they did get the Necro Valley out, it wasn't enough to stop us. So we have one more game to watch. Let's go straight into it. And we're finally going to be up against Marinesis, or Marinesis, however you want to say it. Every time I make a tier list video, there's definitely a couple of people in the comments who are asking, like, where's Marinesis? Or Marinesis? I don't know. But Marinesis is definitely still, like, definitely a rogue deck. It's definitely not bad by any means. I never see it anymore, honestly, so it's never on my mind. This is the first time I played it against it in literal months, but there's not going to be much playing here, unfortunately. I have a Maxx for my opponent's turn 1, and they just pass into it. But they have a Maxx for me on my turn. I can't stop it. So I would say we're even, but we're honestly not. Because here's the thing about Maxx, right? Especially for a deck like this, playing into it on turn 2 is so much different than playing into it on turn 1. And especially in this meta in particular. Because here's the thing about Maxx, right? We used to make Maxx so scary in the past was that most people played a Nibiru. Like, this is pre-tier limit meta. Most people played Nibiru, so it's like, you know, even in a situation like this where you try to OTK on turn 2 through a Maxx, like, there's definitely still the threat of a Nibiru. Well, there's not for me anymore because I did resolve Gigantic Spright, but playing into Maxx on turn 2 is all about, like, just keeping in mind what your opponent has and what they could do to stop you, right? So, like, here, my opponent has an Ash Blossom for the Jet, which is so completely irrelevant that like, yeah, it's like a very irrelevant negate there. But moreover, you know, think about our opponent's board state, right? And, like, what is likely to be in their deck. They have a Chaos Hunter on the field. I definitely, unless they're not playing Imperm, I definitely don't think you're always right to shotgun this because I'm no longer afraid of Imperm. Like, that's not going to affect me anymore. Because my opponent has a card on the field, I can't play it. I can't get Ash Blossomed anymore. I can't get Nibiru'd. Like, playing into Maxx in this meta going second when you can specifically win is honestly, like, a pretty common thing to do. Like, much more common than it was in the past. And there's also the fact that, of course, like I said, I'm on Spright, so it's not like I'm going to get Nibiru once I resolve Gigantic, and then, yeah, I'm just going to use this triple tack to find an easy lethal by taking my opponent's Chaos Hunter. But even without the triple tack, we still hadn't even used Elf's effect or Kitt's effect, so, like, it would have been very easy. Like, even just Kitt for the Double Dragon Lords, F bounce the Chaos Hunter, and then swing for lethal. But here I've got the triple tack, so I'm just going to go ahead and utilize it. Again, really like triple tack in this deck for situations like this, and then also still very good on turn 1 as well. So that's going to do it for these games. Hope you all enjoyed them and enjoyed watching this deck play. Of course, these are my 2 favorite archetypes blended together in one, so I always enjoy busting this one out. But that's going to go ahead and do it for the games. Let's move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating. that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.